Hey, my name's shawnshawn. I sell art on shawnshawn.co. Today we're going to react to Stefan Bauman. So Stefan Bauman is a professional art teacher. He's kind of doing his own online coursework. He has a YouTube channel and a Patreon channel. So a lot of different stuff going on here. So looking at the webpage, he has, just a nice clear call to action, simple, effective learning. So that's pretty clear. It has art here. I would just do a nice painting in the background because you don't know if it's exactly about art right off the get-go, but it is a nice, simple learning thing, simple, effective learning. He has a picture of him face, dress-up shirt, so it kind of looks professorial, I suppose. He has an intro, so one of his latest paintings he has up as his intro video. I think that's pretty good. His first section is educational videos. Then he has popular uploads. I'd probably do that on top, because your newer viewers are you want to show your newest viewers the popular uploads first so they watch longer. And that's all he has. So he probably could add a couple more playlists. Let me see what else he has. Yeah, he has several different playlists, so he could probably add those to the front page, I think. So let's get into the first video. This one's called Paint Portraits Faster Using the Alla Prima Method.
All of the clips that you're going to see in this video are taken from a really long and extensive lesson that I made for my Patreon page, specifically on Alla Prima painting. If you want to get into that lesson and really learn everything that I have to teach you about Alla Prima painting, you can sign up to the Atelier tier for $10 and get access to that tutorial plus all of the other tutorials on my Patreon page.
So he's immediately drawing you into the Patreon page, which I think is smart in the sense that he's saying, like, there's a better teaching tutorial right off the bat, go here. If not, it is kind of the simplified version. I guess that works. I guess it works in the sense that you want to pitch that right away, because people might not watch to the end. So if you pitch it right in early, they're actually going to see it. He starts off with a good headshot, so I think that's good.
You translate the phrase alla prima from Italian to English, it literally means of the first. What it refers to in the world of oil painting is an oil painting that is made in one sitting, meaning that if your workday is 30 minutes or 4 hours, you are going to complete a painting from the first brushstroke to the final refinement in that time. That adds both a lot of pressure, but also the demand for a kind of immediacy and clarity of application that can be really great for students and professionals. Alla prima painting, I think, is not so much for large, baroque, highly worked out compositions, but for rather quick and intimate studies of a subject.
So let's get a little bit ahead, guys. Start where he starts really painting. So he has
warmed that up, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, to get a nice...
So he has a really nice zoom in of his palette that he's painting off. He's using wood. I would encourage glass. You can see the colors a lot better, because when you paint on wood like this, you're gonna see the wood grain through the paint and kind of think it's browner when it's not that brown. So I would use glass, but all is a great detail shot. He has the finished painting and then probably what he's gonna paint.
Earthy color value. We've pretty much done what we can to bring that forward with us, right? Now, if you've done all your homework on vocabulary and things like that, the phrase local color or local value will have come up, right? So what we're talking about here really is the average color value of an area.
I'm not sure I would include the final portrait here. I mean, it is good to show once, but at this stage, you kind of want to see, like, hey, I'm going to start with this. This is what it's going to be, the end product. Let's get into it, and you see how it unrolls. I mean, you can compare and contrast, but I think it's a little bit of a distraction for me.
Now, if we take, for instance, this massive kind of passage of hair right here, we have dark aspects, we have other dark aspects, we have a central kind of lighter plane, we have a hue shift in this area from here being more of a kind of a red-violet into a kind of a red-orange. And all of this, what we want to do with it is kind of compress it and find like a mean average color value to use.
My curious if the student had to cut her hair like this for this or not. It's a terrible haircut. She's a really beautiful woman with this horrible haircut. All right, let's skip ahead a little bit, guys.
Just because I know later on that shadow there is not going to be like really, really super dark, but I do want the darkness of it to stand out versus the background. Right, so look at the stark whiteness of the canvas, right? 110%, that's the next thing we got to get rid of, is that super, super bright white poking through. To do that, I'm going to grab my palette knife for the first time, just for the sake of it, right? I'm going to mix up what I've...
It's curious that he leaves kind of splotches of white on there. I'm not sure what the process is there, but maybe just because it's alla prima, so it's a different method.
Referred to as a flesh tone pool, meaning like a super generic, fleshy hue that I'm going to use to kind of serve as a base that later I'm going to expand out of by kind of brush mixing away from it. The interesting thing about mixing up a little pool of color like this is that you ensure that the flesh tones have a kind of general harmony because they're really all coming out of the same like central generic mixture. Now, the halftone that I'm shooting for here, the color of it, the value of it, in terms of a local color value, I'm looking at all of the lighter halftones within the face, everything within the light shape, and basically looking for what is the average of all of them.
So I really like these detail shots he's done with the computer to really show you what the painting's going to be at. Let's skip ahead a little bit more, guys.
Stage at the moment where I want to be kind of refining the generic sense of color values. While doing this, will I also be advancing a little bit the drawing, advancing a little bit the form? Yes. But primarily what I'm focused on at the moment is trying to realize a full gamut of color and value that will represent this picture in the best possible way. What makes alla prima a great, super efficient process is also what makes it very difficult. Because oil paint has a window of drying time, meaning that while it's wet is when we're going to do all our work. When it's dried, after one session, depending upon the pigments that you use, all of the work that we can do is closed. For this reason, it's important to economize the kind of work that you do while your window of drying time is open.
So there's a huge, you can actually mix for a couple of days in oil, so it's not like you're not under high pressure. Like if you do acrylic, like I use acrylic, you're literally like 5-10 minutes you got to go to mixing windows, so you got to work really, really fast. And usually you just kind of work layer by layer, and acrylic a little bit different than oil.
Meaning that if this painting is going to be a portrait of a model, the features of the face, generally speaking, are going to draw most attention and have the greatest requirement for detail. For this reason, what we're going to do is treat the peripheral areas of the picture with broad, loose brush strokes. And as we get closer to the features of the model, we're going to get tighter and more specific with the drawing and design.
Her face is really pale. It's really hard to, let's get closer here.
Active method for students, in particular online remote learning students, right? Because you're out there in the world, all things around you, in fact, are asking for your attention. They're trying to take you away from your studio. I know it because I've lived it. What you would like to do is have a painting process that suits your capacity for time, for scheduling, for focus.
So really good. I think he's a really good teacher. He's got this really nice finished product, or almost finished product. It's finished enough, but let's go ahead to the next video, guys. Really good sound quality too in the video. This one is called I Wish I Knew This When I Was an Art Student.
Hi everybody, I'm Stephen Bauman, and in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 5 very specific things that I wish I knew when I first started out as an art student. So all the way back in 2004.
So a really nice strong intro, just straight to the video. Like it's going to cover 5 tips for beginning art lessons, head-on shot, which I really like, and one of his works in the background, so you get a good feel for the work.
I traveled from Miami, Florida, where I'm originally from, to Florence, Italy to study classical realism. This means drawing and painting in a very realistic style. There were so many things that I weren't prepared for. For starters, I had almost never in my life worked from life, and so working with live models all the time was a really difficult adjustment. But there were also some very specific things that I was not thinking the right way about, and these are the tips that I'm going to share with you now. And by the way, because maybe my face is not so interesting to look at the whole time, I'm going to show you a video of a block-in drawing of a portrait that I made just recently.
All right, so let's skip ahead just a little bit, guys.
Specifically designed to help you get over that first stage of the drawing that's super important while getting accurate proportions and a good sense of design. There's a link in the description of this video if you want to get there. Anyway, let's get on to these 5 points. The first thing that I want to let you know that you might not be aware of is that in the problems and challenges that you're facing as an art student, you are definitively not alone. In fact, there's an entire book dedicated to explaining exactly the set of circumstances that you're entering as an art student, and it's called Art and Fear. I promise you that if you spend 10 minutes with this book, it will immediately start to deliver value into your life in the form of perspective and knowledge from experts who have been through what you're going through right now. It talks in great detail about a lot of the problems that you're experiencing and the challenges you're facing and the kinds of things that make you want to give up before you're even started. In fact, these are all pretty common to everybody that goes through the process of learning. When I started to draw, I was terrible at it.
So a good point here. Let's go into his second point.
Our teachers are not perfect, and we don't know everything. By that I mean, we each have strengths and weaknesses, and we have our own biases about what are great ideas for art students and bad ideas for art students. And one thing is for absolute certain, I've never met a teacher who has literally all the pieces to the puzzle. In general, we have quite a few, and we're trying to develop as clear a picture as we can for our students.
Yeah, so probably you would kind of like learn from one teacher, then kind of move to the next one and kind of master different skill sets. One's gonna better color, one at composition, one at line drawing, and so you're gonna get better feel for different techniques from different teachers. But it's great to have an art mentor because you can learn much faster with a teacher right on hand if they're good. Let's go to his next point.
What I want to recommend to you is that you look for hard skills. So studying things like anatomy, color theory, drawing fundamentals, manufacturing materials that you use to make fine art, and even art history. These are all hard skills that you can internalize and that have clear applications in the real world. They're not related to whatever art is in fashion at that time, and putting them into your skill base contributes to making you a more versatile artist when you go out into the world to make a living.
Yeah, so that's really strong advice. I think you really kind of want to have a good fundamentals and well-roundedness in your art base before you kind of focus in on a niche. You can see this a lot of times with some artists. They just kind of try to draw straight into a niche and then they get kind of lost because they can't execute on color or composition or linear work, or they don't know what they're working from as far as history, so that can be a drawback. So it's really great, the art history to get a fundamentals of where art has evolved over time, but don't let it hold you back. But kind of as a basis of what sells in the past, you can probably use a lot of that to sell in the future. Obviously, portraits are going to sell, landscapes are going to sell. Abstract is a little more difficult, but it's hot right now, so you can see how that evolves. For basics, I think he's got a really good solid point here. Let's go on to the next point.
Arrive at a place where you have got the skills to be an artist. The goal is actually to always keep learning. It's hard to remember when you're first starting out that education is not pre-packaged and predestined to end at a certain point. Going to schools for 3 or 4 years and getting good skills, and even maybe getting a diploma at the end of it, can be very misleading. From personal experience, I can say that when I finally left the academy after 4 years, I had just enough skills to propel myself to really start learning to be an artist properly. By that I mean, I could draw stuff and paint stuff and make it look kinda how it was supposed to. But I want to tell you that that's the baseline for being a professional artist, and eventually you need to aspire much higher than that. So as the old saying goes, don't aim too low and risk only hitting that mark.
Yeah, that can be a really big drawback, thinking once you got a skill, you're done. You see this in other careers too. You always want to be learning, so that's really important. But especially with art, because your style's going to evolve over time, so you'll want to be consistent. Consistent practice is always the best method. You can take a really kind of average student, and as long as he's painting all the time, like daily or at least a couple times a week, versus a student that's better talent, but then they only practice once a month, that slowly is going to close the gap and pass him. And so if you're just really passionate and consistent and really be practicing, you're going to really level up your art skills. Let's go on to the next point.
Being an art student. In fact, it's the one thing without which none of the other stuff works. The tip is this: you got to bring cold passion into the studio. Let me explain what I mean. There are 2 types of passion that you experience as an artist. There's hot passion, and that's being in the moment and being super excited. You can't wait to get into the studio and splash paint around, or graphite, or whatever medium it is that you're using. You're on fire to get to work. Hot passion is really, really great. It can carry you through some days when you're maybe dragging behind a little bit. Cold passion, however, for students is much more important. And what it means is this: you need to bring the same consistent energy and focus into the studio with you every single time you go to work.
Yeah, so this is really the difference between expert and amateur. A lot of amateur painters that paint on the weekend, because that's kind of like they got a nice day job and they really don't have time until the weekend, so they're just kind of painting a little bit inconsistently. Some weekends are like, oh, I'm off, I don't feel like going in, so they don't go in, and then next weekend they kind of get started again, but then it's kind of a slow start because they're a little rusty already. So the best methodology is really just try to paint or draw daily. And even if you don't feel it, just go and do it. And that's going to really distinct between, amateur and professional. It's really going to make that huge difference over time. And you'll just see yourself getting way ahead of other people who are just kind of weekend painters only. So if you just draw all the time and, work on your portraiture, work on your, architecture style drawing, landscape drawing, and really just nail that down, you're going to really get really far ahead of the competition and become a really professional artist versus someone that's kind of really struggling and gets stuck in that stage where you're just not selling and you're just kind of working for fun, but you're not really selling all that much. A lot of it has to do with the fact that you haven't reached that level yet. So I think he has a really strong video. Let's go on to the next video, guys. The next one is called Make All Your Portraits Better by Practicing This Step. So the secret step. It's a really good hook to do that. You want to do with every single video you can. Have kind of a hook, create curiosity, like you have to click it to find out what it is. That's really a strong way to pull you in.
In this video, I'm going to tell you all the stuff that I've figured out over the years about using block-ins as an effective method to get accurate proportions, to get a good sense of construction, and to really build the foundation for your drawing moving forward. I think that for drawing students, whether you're beginning, intermediate, or advanced, it's one of the most important things that you can practice. And this is my take on it. By the way, if you do want to learn about my techniques of drawing and painting and all the lessons that I put out, it's all on Patreon.
So again, he starts in with the Patreon pitch, so that's really smart because you pull him in like, hey, by the way, I got a full course. So he gets that out of the way in the beginning while people might lose interest, so that's smart. He gets a nice headshot to start off. Let's start over here.
Block-in world. The phrase that I like to keep in mind when I'm making a block-in is that I'm trying to make the simplest possible expression of the subject. Now, there are two criteria in that statement, and both are equally important, right? We want to simplify the subject, so we want to take away.
So I like here he's using a mechanical pencil. That's what I would kind of suggest. They have like these really non-parallel that you kind of sharpen and everything. You have to be really careful with the touch. But if you have a mechanical pencil, you can just kind of, it's already thin lead. It's going to be straight. You might break it, obviously, but it always has that nice little tiny pencil lead, so it really kind of narrows it, makes it simple for you.
As much visual information as possible. But at the same time, we need to respect the fact that our drawing needs to be comparable to the subject. We need to be able to look from our drawing to the subject, make a comparison, and try to fix whatever errors we find. So if we oversimplify, right?
There's also one thing he's missing, which I think is really cool, is a little pencil guide. It's like a little metal tool, and you can actually have shapes in it that are just, you can erase by shape. So it's a really cool way to work. You can look up, I have one video on that. Let's skip ahead a little bit more.
Simplifications are important because they help your drawing be flexible. Now, every art teacher in the world knows that a drawing is not usually going to get too much better than what the block-in allows it to do. And what we mean by this is that the block-in is meant to solve your proportions. It's meant to solve a little bit of your construction. If, for instance, you're working with a nude figure, but even with a portrait for that matter, it's supposed to solve the gesture. It's supposed to be the foundation upon which all of the other really beautiful stuff that you do kind of balances. And if that foundation is poor, right, you're going to have this really beautifully rendered drawing that in fact seems like it's made out of bubble gum, or essentially is not really well constituted in the way that the subject is. Within the block-in stage, we can say that there are many different...
One thing he's not using, which I mean, he probably doesn't need it. Obviously, he knows what he's doing, but you can use a tool. It's called a scale divider, and it has two sides. It's like a scale with two sides, like a cross. And you can scale from large to small, or from small to large. So you can take, say, a photo this big and make it this big. Or you get a really large portrait and you can reduce it to a really tiny space. And it really helps you check proportions much faster. And you can really scale up much faster in your drawing skill. I have a video on that too. Check that out. Let's skip ahead a little bit more.
Some of the key symmetrical features. We get into the cheekbones, the outside corners of the mouth, the wing cartilage on the nose on either side. Basically anything that's a pretty major angle break or major form on the face, we want to represent that. Now, there's a dozen different ways to kind of get into this face. I have my own idiosyncratic process that I've developed over all these years.
It's interesting, the light he chooses here is kind of like this really, I would say Renaissance style lighting, where it's just like a little bit of light and it's a little bit subtle shadows around the face and everything. But I think I would use a brighter light. I think the light I'm using is a little better. I would have a background light normally, but I don't have it. I like his background setup. It's very nice. But I think I would have a little bit harsher light on the face to kind of make it understandable in the video as far as teaching.
Visually, it's something that we use as a tool to kind of help us negotiate really complicated subjects. But we shift from using purely line into using a very simple version of value expression, right? Basically, what we look for is where the major shadow shapes fit into the picture. It's at this point we're in this kind of estuary in our drawing. And that estuary is in between being totally flat and abstract, right, and linear, and something that then has a visual presentation, right? Something that if we squinted down, it would kind of look a little bit natural. It would look real in a sense. Now, we're not going to go so far as to get into transitions and halftones because that's way beyond the remit of what a block-in requires.
Skip ahead a little bit, guys.
Unified value. That value is going to be relatively light. When I'm working in graphite, usually I'm going to fill in the flat shadow shape with maybe an H, maybe an HB. I might give it a little bit of stumping just to get the value slightly more even on the paper. That flat value inside the shadow that is relatively light combined with a little bit of edge control along the boundary of the shadow where it meets the light shape. I might make it a little bit softer or a little bit harder in other places. That is the extent to which we're going to define the shadow fully. It's never going to become like a rendered shadow. That's not what this phase is about. It's about a very simple expression of the shadow and light relationship. If you want to start learning portraiture the right way, the best thing that you can do is introduce yourself to practicing this phase. Block-ins are a lot like going to the gym. You need to do a lot of them, you need to do it consistently, and you need to have a routine when you do. I tend to like to recommend maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours of drawing on a block-in.
Another cool thing he has on his setup is he has his iPhone, which is he's drawing from a photo, and he has it on a tripod, so it's just right next to him in a certain page. I just put it on my easel, so it's back to back. But it is nice to kind of have that very close by so you can just look and study that. Another really cool option is to draw it digitally because then you can really zoom in if you want, kind of get the details, zoom out. I would start the block-in technique like he's talking about and then kind of slowly refine it. That's the best way I think to go. There's other students that kind of do a rough sketch and then they just start painting from the real rough sketch and they got all the proportions right. So who's to say which is the best methodology there?
Is built upon, and our drawing will never really get better than what that is if we're only practicing that one time per 30-hour drawing. I think that we're missing a lot of opportunity to grow more and faster. So if you want to accelerate your progress as a drawing student, this rapid practice of block-ins, I also think is probably one of the best ways that you can spend your time.
He makes a really good strong point about doing the block-ins because that's kind of your really rough sketch of it. And if you get really good at that, you can really just go from there to like a really final product that's much better. Because if you don't get your block-ins right, to his point earlier, you're going to have proportions off, the shadows off, and it's kind of going to be a mess kind of going forward. So if you can nail those block-ins right away, it's just like boom, 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 boom. And then you can, have a really great painting from there. So I think he makes some really solid points here. Obviously has some really good high technical skill in drawing and his painting as well. So he obviously has some really good, I think he has a pretty good teaching technology as well. Let's go to his website. The really swirly thing about his website, he has I think 3 websites. He has one he's working on, which isn't finished. He has another one that's prominent, which is an instructional video, like I'm a teacher, here's my teaching, but none of his artwork. And then this third website, which is older, I think, and this has an all-in-one thing. So I think he's trying to split off his instructional side versus his portrait, but then it's kind of like you can't find his work. So it's a little bit challenging if you're kind of trying to figure out what his work actually looks like. So Stefan Bauman, they're both artists, so it's super confusing. The other Stefan Bauman is also a teacher, but he's more a formal art teacher at some college. I don't know why he doesn't have his own website. It's so annoying. Let me try to find it again, guys. His website, does he have his own artwork? His Instagram, which is just... So he's really promoting his educational side, which is cool. But I kind of wanted to see... Let's see, here's a website. Oh my god, it's so complicated. So from what I can tell, he doesn't really have a website on his own work, which is kind of a shame. It would be nice to really have that pop out, and he probably could do it as maybe a subfolder on this coursework. I don't know. He just has kind of his coursework. And he's combined it with other artists, so which is strong for learning because you want to have multiple artists teaching you, but it's kind of weird to combine it all together and then call it your own website. You're like, because what I would do, I think this is a really cool thing as far as you combine several teachers together, but I wouldn't do it under your own name because then you don't know what your own artwork looks like. So he has stuff like how to study these various master teachers. I think this is really good because he's already proven himself. He has another course with Patrick Burns. I mean, I guess this is a good way to do it because he's kind of delegating off to other artists that are really master skilled as well. So he's creating a kind of his own school inside with multiple teachers, which is kind of how you should learn anyway. But he doesn't have his own artwork, so it's just kind of, I'd really like to see that and just kind of get a feel for his own work. Let's go back to his Instagram, I guess. It's kind of strange to do it this way, but it is what it is. He's obviously a very well-skilled artist and painter and drawer, but then I think he's just boiled this down to Instagram and Facebook, I guess, to pitch, which is a little bit of a weak spot because if you get problems with Instagram or Facebook, you're completely SOL as far as your fan base. You want to have the drawn off to your own newsletter because you can't control what's these social media is doing. Obviously, he's not doing anything controversial, so it probably won't be blocked at that point, but you always run the risk if something might happen. I've had kind of Flickr, and then it kind of went down the drain because people jumped off Flickr, and I built this huge fan base, but then everyone left, so it didn't really matter. And you can be really controversial. I was on MySpace, and that disappeared, and I was on Pinterest, and then Pinterest changed, and then it was kind of hard to kind of follow up on the comments, so I kind of just let that coast. So these websites are going to change over time, so that's, you really want to have your own website that's really solid about your own work, and have that kind of as your foundation, have everything point to it, all your social media, LinkedIn, your YouTube channel, and have that all point to the website so you can kind of sell stuff from there, which he's pointing to his website, but he's only selling his coursework. He's just trying to make money that way. He's not trying to sell his own work. So it's a little bit interesting. I guess he just focused on teaching, which maybe he makes a lot more teaching than selling his artwork. I'm not sure. Obviously, great classical academic style drawing and painting, which are really the fundamentals of traditional academic learning pre-1950s. And I still think these are really solid skills to learn. I mean, it's kind of silly to try to, like, I think in the 50s they just started studying abstract art and not even studying the fundamentals like this. And it was just completely wacky because you need that foundation of classical academic a little bit, at least like 2-3 years at least, to really kind of be able to say, okay, now I want to abstract the face and go from there, but at least you can kind of fall back on that. So I think it's really important to kind of study these fundamentals of drawing and painting. I think for me, for him, I think I would just have a website that has about his own artwork at some point, not just his classes, or have it subsect of his class art book, because then you get confused with the other Stephen Bauman, who is a very similar spelling, which is why I changed my name. I had the same spelling as Jay-Z, so I was like, there's no way I'm going to beat Jay-Z on that. And SEO trending, and this guy's a little bit stepping on the foot of the other Stephen Bauman with almost the same spelling, so it's like they're competing on Google to be who's number one. Obviously, this guy's winning a little bit over the other guy, but they're both great teachers. And because they stuck to their name, they're just kind of like, they're really struggling on Google to kind of fight that out. But I don't know, a lot of artists just stick with their real name, which usually is what your one is suggested, but it's harder to kind of find yourself if you don't have like a specialized fun name, which is kind of why the graffiti names are great, because most people don't have another graffiti name. As long as you're practicing way more than the other graffiti artists, you're going to be ranked number one for sure. Like Cause, everyone knows who Cause is. They might not know his real name. Everyone know who Obey is, but they might not know it's Shepard Fairey. They probably do at this point. Banksy, everyone knows who Banksy is. They still don't really know his real name. So those kind of made up names are almost a better branding than an original name, so to say, because you run into this problem where you're competing in Google for the same name. That can be a real issue. And a lot of artists don't think about that, and they just do 100 different things and links all in their own name, and then there might be a better person or some famous actor or something, and you're like, you're never going to be top of page one. What's the point of that? So that kind of makes it challenging. The way you can get around that is have your name, and then art, or your name and painting is kind of your website name. That's probably the best way to go about it, and don't use just your name only, because there might be someone with the same name, and they might be in music, they might be actor, and they'll slowly rise up the ranks and kind of push you out, and then they get confused. So use your name plus art as the website name is probably the best route. Hopefully you guys liked it. I like this guy's instructional. I think he has really good classical academic drawing and painting skills that you guys can learn from. If you like to subscribe, you can subscribe below, and I'll see you on the next Artist React video. And hopefully I'll fix my backlight. Thanks, guys.